Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. Wait, this isn't my body. Why do I have a slim waist and long hair? You know, sometimes I wish I had never met Marcus Chen. Or maybe, I wish I'd met him a month later, after I graduated, when my mind wasn't so eager to take risks and my schedule wasn't so flexible. But if I hadn't met him, I wouldn't be telling you this story now, and I certainly wouldn't understand human consciousness the way I do. I'm Jake Morrison, and I was, at the time, a final-year psychology student. I'd spent 4 years staring at textbooks about Freudian slips and cognitive behavioral therapy, always feeling like I was scratching at the surface of something infinitely larger. My specific focus was on identity and perception, how we construct self, and how stable that construction actually is. I always suspected identity wasn't as solid as we made it out to be. Then there was Marcus. Marcus Chen wasn't just my roommate. He was a phenomenon, a neuroscience prodigy at MIT. Marcus lived in a world of circuits, algorithms, and things that buzzed with unnatural light. While I was analyzing case studies of multiple personality disorder, Marcus was building something that made multiple personalities look like child's play. Our apartment wasn't a home. It was half a psychology library and half a mad scientist's lab. Wires snaked across the floor, glowing liquids sat in beakers, and the smell of ozone mingled with the scent of old coffee. "Jake, you're looking at it all wrong," he'd said one night, gesturing to my notes on the stability of core beliefs. Identity isn't a structure, it's a frequency, a vibration. We're all vibrating at a certain frequency based on our physical configuration and neurological pathways. What if you could tune into another frequency, a parallel one? I remember a feeling of skepticism mixed with professional curiosity. A parallel version of myself, Marcus, that's science fiction. Is it, he asked, adjusting a pair of goggles that looked like they belonged on a deep-sea diver. I've been working on this for 3 years. It's not about parallel universes, it's about parallel consciousness. The human brain generates enough electrical activity to form complex resonance fields. What if we could link 2 resonance fields, even just momentarily, to explore what happens when 2 different me's meet? He started showing me schematics. They were wildly complex, part quantum mechanics, part neural stimulation, part pure speculation. I couldn't follow most of it, but the core idea was intoxicating, a chance to go beyond observing consciousness to actually experiencing it from another perspective. "I call it the consciousness resonance compound," he announced proudly, holding up a small glass vial. The compound itself was mesmerizing. It was a thick purple liquid that swirled like oil in water. When Marcus shook it, tiny sparks seemed to dance inside, giving it an ethereal glow. "So what does it do?" I asked, putting down my psychology notes. "Theoretically," Marcus explained, his eyes shining with the excitement of discovery, "it enhances your resonance signature. It acts as a bridge. If your parallel self-signature is close enough, it creates a momentary connection, like putting 2 tuning forks next to each other and striking one. The other one vibrates." "And what's the risk?" "Well," he paused, scratching his head, "I've tested it on mice. They come back a little dazed. Nothing permanent. The biggest risk is sensory overload. Your self could get confused. Maybe," he shrugged, making me feel slightly less comfortable with the idea. For the next week, the compound sat on Marcus's desk and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Marcus hadn't asked me to be a subject. He just wanted to show off his work. But I kept circling back to it. My professor had just returned a paper where he'd criticized my overly theoretical approach, urging me to find real-world applications. This felt like the ultimate real-world application. I picked up the vial. The glass was cool against my skin. The liquid inside looked like liquid velvet, beautiful and dangerous. I uncorked it and sniffed cautiously. The odor was strange, a faint minty scent, almost refreshing, mixed with something metallic and slightly acrid, like burnt copper wire. "You really think it works?" I asked Marcus. He turned from his equipment, a tangle of wires on his head that looked like Medusa's snakes. "I don't think so. Jake, I know so. But it's not for you. You're too cautious." His comment stung. It was a dare disguised as concern. He knew how to push my buttons, knew how to appeal to my intellectual pride. I took a breath. The truth was, I was tired of just reading about things. I wanted to experience something that would genuinely test the boundaries of human identity. No, I'm not cautious. Marcus, I'm methodical. If this works, it changes everything we know about psychology. All right, he said, sounding too casual. Just drink it and lie down on the couch. It's designed to last exactly 8 hours. When the compound wears off, your consciousness should snap back. Simple. I raised the vial to my lips. My hand was shaking slightly, a mix of genuine fear and immense anticipation. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, feeling the smooth glass against my lips. Then, I drank. The liquid was surprisingly warm going down, then spread through my veins like ice water. It tasted exactly like it smelled minty and metallic. My vision started to tunnel immediately. The colorful chaos of Marcus's lab began to shrink into a single point of bright, fuzzy light. A high-pitched whine started in my ears, increasing rapidly in intensity until it felt like my brain was being pulled apart. Marcus, I tried to say, but the words were garbled in my throat. I felt a slight seizure run through my body. The last thing I heard was Marcus shouting, "Wait, Jake, I didn't mean now," before everything went black. The return to consciousness wasn't gradual. It was immediate and disorienting. I didn't wake up slowly. I snapped back into being, a jolt that felt like being plugged into a socket. The first thing I registered was the overwhelming softness of my surroundings. The mattress felt like I was floating on clouds, not my lumpy old dorm bed. The sheets were silky, smooth against my skin, far too luxurious for a student budget. The air was warm and smelled faintly of lavender and vanilla, not the stale coffee and ozone of Marcus's lab. I tried to sit up, but something felt fundamentally wrong. My center of gravity was different. The movement of rising felt lighter, less centered, as if my body didn't have the same dense, solid weight I was used to. The most jarring part was the cascade of hair that fell forward over my face as I lifted my head. Wait, what? My hair was a standard crew-cut short, practical, easy to manage. But the texture here was fine and long, a curtain of warm blonde falling past my shoulders. I instinctively tried to brush it back, feeling the fine, soft strands tangle between my fingers. The hand that reached up was also wrong small, delicate, with long, slender fingers. Panic started to bubble in my throat. I looked around the room, desperately seeking some familiarity. The walls were painted a soft, calming shade of blue-gray. A plush, white carpet covered the floor. On the bedside table sat a silver-frame picture of a smiling couple, and next to it, a small, elegant phone. Nothing matched Marcus's lab or my dorm room. I stood up, pulling myself out from beneath the thick duvet. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the full-length mirror attached to the wardrobe. The scream caught in my throat, sounding high-pitched and strange. I backed away slowly, clutching the duvet around me, staring at the figure in the mirror. It wasn't me. It wasn't Jake Morrison. She was stunningly beautiful, a young woman with wide, cerulean blue eyes and perfectly smooth, porcelain skin. Her blonde hair fell in soft, voluminous waves around her shoulders, complementing the curves of her face. She looked like a model or a professional athlete, toned, but soft and feminine. The me in the mirror was wearing a simple, pale pink pajama set a loose-fitting top that fell off one shoulder and a pair of matching bottoms. As I watched the reflection, the new body took a deep, shuddering breath. I saw two distinct shapes rise with that breath, curving forward from the chest. Breasts. I pressed my hands against my own chest, feeling the softness beneath the fabric. The sensation was immediate and profound, a new physical reality that was foreign and undeniably there. I didn't just see them, I felt them as part of my body. A new weight distribution, a constant presence that subtly shifted with every movement. My face felt hot with a flush of shame, embarrassment, and sheer terror. I felt an instinctual urge to cross my arms over my chest, but the movement only made the situation more real, drawing attention to the new contours of my form. I moved closer to the mirror, my new feet making no sound on the plush carpet. The details were staggering: the high cheekbones, the defined collarbones, the gentle curves of the waist. I tried to speak again, just to hear my voice. "Marcus, why can't I?" The voice that emerged was high, light, and almost melodic. It was completely disconnected from the mental self-image I carried. My mind screamed in a deep baritone, but my body responded with a gentle soprano. It felt like my own words were being filtered through a stranger's vocal cords. My lower body felt different, too. I noticed the natural tendency of my legs to stay close together, a subtle tightness in my hip flexors, a different way of balancing. When I took a small, hesitant step, my hips swayed slightly with the motion. I felt less like I was walking and more like I was gliding, light and fluid. Overwhelmed, I sank onto the edge of the bed. I needed to know who this person was. I reached for the phone on the nightstand, my smaller hands feeling oddly delicate against the metallic frame. The screen lit up, showing a lock screen photo of the woman and the man from the silver frame picture, a smiling, athletic man with warm eyes. The name on the notifications bar read Jessica. The panic escalated from terror to cold dread. Jessica Palmer. I recognized the name immediately from a local design blog. She was a promising interior designer known for her minimalist aesthetic. I quickly unlocked the phone with the facial recognition feature, which worked on me. I scrolled through the apps and messages. The calendar was full: 10:00 a.m. client meeting, 2:00 p.m. yoga with Maya, 7:00 p.m. dinner with Brandon. Brandon. I recognized him immediately as the man from the lock screen photo. A text message popped up. Morning beautiful, see you tonight, don't work too hard. XX Brandon. The reality of the situation hit me with the force of a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a brief hallucination, this was a complete occupation. I had swapped places with someone. My consciousness was in her body, and if Marcus was right, her consciousness was in mine, currently lying unconscious in our apartment. I didn't just borrow a body, I whispered to myself, watching the reflection's lips form the words. I took her entire life. My original fear gave way to a more complex emotion: guilt. The kind of guilt that settles in the pit of your stomach and makes you feel physically sick. I looked at the mirror again, seeing a beautiful stranger, and for the first time, I felt the intense weight of another person's identity resting on my shoulders. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't changed back. The 8-hour window was almost certainly past. I reached for the phone to call Marcus, my fingers fumbling with the keys, but I couldn't remember his number from Jessica's contact list. The body I inhabited was beautiful. Yes, but it wasn't mine. It was a prison, a costume that felt increasingly heavy with every minute I spent in it. I had to figure out how to navigate this world, how to be Jessica Palmer, until I could get back to my own life. The first few hours of being Jessica were defined by a strange, overwhelming sense of self-consciousness. It felt as if 1,000 spotlights were trained on my movements. I wasn't just observing a body. I was living in one that felt foreign, delicate, and constantly in motion. I had to get dressed for the client meeting on Jessica's calendar. My first hurdle was simply finding the right clothes in her walk-in closet. The closet itself was massive, filled with rows of perfectly organized garments, all in sizes that looked tiny compared to my old large t-shirts. I looked for something practical, something neutral, something that didn't emphasize the changes in my body. I found a pair of form-fitting black leggings and a soft, oversized light blue sweater. I'd never worn leggings before, not even on my own body during workouts. When I pulled them on over Jessica's legs, I was instantly aware of how different the fabric felt: stretchy, soft, and clinging to every contour. The fabric traced the curves of her hips, highlighting the flare that was so unlike my male frame. The sensation was unnerving, almost too intimate. I kept trying to pull the sweater down over my butt to hide the curves that felt so exposed. As I dressed, I became acutely aware of Jessica's body reacting to the sensation of fabric. The leggings tightened around my thighs and hips, creating a continuous line that made me feel self-conscious about every movement. I looked in the mirror, watching my new form adjust to the clothing. The black fabric of the leggings emphasized the length and shape of her legs. I felt a flush spread across my face, not of attraction to the reflection, but of deep embarrassment at the way I looked. A strange mix of feeling exposed and strangely delicate at the same time. I also discovered that simply walking was now a different act. The narrower hips and center of gravity meant that I had to place my feet closer together. When I walked, my hips moved slightly, a natural sway that felt both graceful and slightly uncontrollable. I practiced walking from the bedroom to the kitchen, trying to keep a neutral posture, but the inherent structure of Jessica's body dictated a different movement pattern. The phone buzzed. It was Maya, Jessica's best friend, Jess. Coffee date today. I need to tell you all about my new boss. My heart pounded. I had to actually interact with someone who knew Jessica. I needed to act normal. I quickly reviewed the messages between Maya and Jessica, trying to absorb some personality traits. Jessica seemed bubbly, friendly, and very encouraging. I typed back carefully, mimicking Jessica's habit of using emojis. Sounds great. See you at the daily grind at 1. The simple act of composing a text message in character felt like a betrayal. I was not Jessica. I was an imposter using her digital footprint to lure her friend into a meeting with a stranger inhabiting her body. The next challenge was the client meeting. It was for interior design, a topic I knew nothing about. I sat in front of Jessica's laptop for an hour, frantically scrolling through her past work and design portfolios. The design aesthetics were totally foreign to me. I was a psychology major. I liked books and practical furniture, not minimalist Scandinavian decor. When I met the client, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, I had to completely rely on Jessica's notes and a lot of generic compliments. I just love the natural light in this space. Sarah seemed to find me slightly off, perhaps too quiet or reserved, but she attributed it to creative focus. The hardest part was maintaining the high-pitched voice for an hour. My vocal cords felt strained, and my throat tightened from the effort of maintaining a register that wasn't natural to me. As I walked out of the meeting, I caught myself doing something instinctive that Jessica had written about in her notes, pulling down my sweater to cover my hands. I realized I was using the long sleeves as a physical barrier against the world, a subconscious attempt to hide. The fear and shame were becoming overwhelming, especially when I thought about Marcus and what I'd done to Jessica. I was not supposed to be here. The final challenge of the day was the date with Brandon. I tried to postpone, citing fatigue from work. I feel like I'm coming down with something. I texted. Nonsense, he replied instantly. I booked a reservation at that Italian place you love. I'll pick you up at 7. Can't wait to see you. He wasn't going to be easily deterred. I had no choice but to go. Dressing for the date was even more daunting than getting ready for work. I settled on a deep emerald green dress that fell just below the knee, with long sleeves and a soft V-neck. It felt slightly more modest than some of the other dresses I had seen in her closet, but still elegant. The fabric clung to my waist and hips in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I spent an extra 5 minutes trying to find a bra that felt comfortable but still supportive. The sensation of wearing one was new and strangely restrictive. The physical feeling of the fabric pressing against my breast made me hyper-aware of their presence, which made me blush even when I was alone. I stared at myself in the mirror. The image looking back was undeniably Jessica, but the anxiety in her eyes was all mine. When Brandon arrived, he smiled brightly, and for a second, I thought I was looking at an old friend, but his expression quickly turned to one of loving admiration. Jess, wow, you look incredible. I felt the heat rising in my face again, a reaction I couldn't control. Thank you, I said in a small, shaky voice that I hoped sounded like polite modesty. You seem a little nervous, he observed as we drove to the restaurant. Long day. Something like that, I muttered. The dinner was a blur of trying to keep up with Jessica's favorite foods and interests. I kept asking him questions to deflect attention from myself. Brandon talked about his job as an engineer, and I realized how much he genuinely loved Jessica. He complimented her kindness, her creativity, and her ability to make him laugh. As we finished dinner, he reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was warm and firm. The moment his fingers closed around mine, Jessica's body reacted. A wave of goosebumps erupted on my arm, making me flinch slightly. Did I do something wrong? He asked immediately. No, I quickly responded, pulling my hand back and placing it in my lap. I'm a little cold. The lie felt hollow, but the reaction had been undeniable. My mind was panicking, but Jessica's body seemed to have an automated, biological response to Brandon's touch. It felt like her physical memory was trying to take over my current self-control. I went home that night, exhausted and thoroughly shaken. I looked in the mirror one more time. The face staring back at me was still Jessica's. The 8 hours had become an entire day, and I was beginning to realize that the body was far more than just a shell. It carried a history, an identity, and instincts of its own. As the days turned into weeks, the initial sharp terror began to dull into a constant, low-grade anxiety. Living as Jessica became a performance, one I had to refine constantly to avoid detection. I studied her mannerisms, her vocabulary, even the way she tilted her head when listening. I had to become less Jake and more Jessica simply to survive. The physical aspects of the transformation were perhaps the most jarring. The clothing that once felt like a costume started to feel, less so. I remember a specific morning when I chose an outfit for a client meeting. I pulled out a soft cashmere sweater and a pair of dark wash jeans. The first few times I wore clothes like this, I felt exposed. But as time went on, I started to notice how different materials felt on Jessica's skin. The cashmere was exceptionally soft, providing a feeling of comfort I hadn't realized I was missing. I also discovered a strange feeling of security in the length of Jessica's hair. I often found myself brushing it forward over one cheek, creating a physical barrier between my face and the outside world. It felt like hiding behind a veil, and in public places, especially when I felt vulnerable, it became an instinctive habit. One evening, I had to attend an art gallery opening. This required something more formal than my usual jeans and sweater. I selected a black pencil skirt that hugged my waist and hips and a loose blouse. I paired it with high heels, a completely new experience for me. The first steps in those heels were agonizing. I stumbled, and my ankles rolled. The tight skirt restricted my movement in a way that felt unnatural. But then, I observed Jessica's posture in the mirror again. I adjusted my spine to stand taller and focused on placing my weight through my hips, not my knees. The feeling of being elevated changed my perspective entirely. It forced me to carry myself differently, with more poise and less of a heavy-footed stomp I was accustomed to as Jake. I practiced in front of the mirror for 30 minutes, slowly mastering the glide rather than the walk. By the time I left for the gallery, the high heels didn't feel like a punishment. They felt like a tool for achieving a certain graceful posture. The psychological shift started to mirror the physical. The constant feeling of having a chest was perhaps the most prominent physical marker. The presence of the breasts, which had initially been a source of shame and physical self-consciousness, started to become part of my subconscious landscape. They became a kind of emotional anchor. When I was stressed or overwhelmed, I would unconsciously fold my arms over my chest. The feeling of the soft flesh beneath my arms provided a strange comfort, a physical, gentle pressure that felt oddly reassuring. My relationship with Brandon became more complex during this phase. I was trying to keep him at arm's length to minimize the guilt, but he was persistent and kind. He kept planning intimate dinners and cozy evenings watching movies. I couldn't understand why he cared so much about Jessica. One evening, we decided to take a walk along the waterfront. It was a classic scene from a movie, and I felt like a spectator in my own body. We were walking and talking when a sudden, unexpected rain shower began. Brandon quickly unzipped his jacket and placed it around my shoulders. "Here," he said, pulling me close to him so the jacket would cover me properly. "Don't get cold." The feeling of being sheltered, of being cared for, hit me on a deeply visceral level. It was more than just a gesture. It was a physical act of protection that triggered something primal in me. The new body I inhabited, which I was slowly getting used to, reacted to his presence by feeling safe and warm. As we stood there, huddled beneath the overhang of a shop, the sound of the rain filling the silence, Brandon leaned in. He looked at me, a soft smile on his face, and brushed a strand of wet hair from my cheek. "You really are something special, Jess," he murmured, and then he closed the distance. I knew, in my mind, that I should pull away. I knew this was wrong. I was not Jessica, and I couldn't allow myself to lead him on. But when he kissed me, all rational thought ceased. The kiss wasn't a powerful, demanding one. It was soft and gentle, full of affection. His lips felt soft against mine, warm and slightly damp from the rain. The sensation of his breath and the feeling of being held in that moment were overwhelming. My body reacted instantly. My toes curled inside my shoes. I felt a tingling sensation spread rapidly down my spine. My knees felt weak. It was an involuntary physical response that transcended my male identity as Jake. When he finally pulled back, a question hung unspoken in the air. I looked into his eyes, trying to gauge his reaction, but my own face was flushed with embarrassment. I had let it happen. I had experienced a level of intimacy that I had explicitly told myself to avoid. I have to go, I whispered, pulling away abruptly. I ran back to Jessica's apartment, leaving Brandon standing alone in the rain. I locked the door behind me and sank against it, breathless. The taste of mint and rain lingered on my lips. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the apartment window. My face was a mess of emotion. My thoughts were in chaos. Was that a physiological response from Jessica's body? Or was that actually me feeling those things? I didn't have an answer. I felt a deep, uncomfortable pleasure mixed with profound guilt. The line between Jake and Jessica had blurred, and I wasn't sure if I was still just role-playing or if a part of me was actually beginning to enjoy being in her body. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't thought about Marcus or my own body for almost an entire week. The immersive reality of Jessica's life had completely overshadowed my own identity. The kiss had fundamentally changed my perspective. I could no longer view this as an extended experiment. I was living a life that was becoming intertwined with another person. I knew I had to find Marcus, not just to return home, but to understand what I had done to Jessica. I started searching for any clues to Marcus's whereabouts. I went back to our apartment complex, only to find a new person occupying our space. Marcus, apparently, had disappeared, leaving only a cryptic note: lab moved, follow the resonance signature. It took me 3 frantic days of searching, scrolling through university message boards, calling mutual friends, and following the vague digital breadcrumbs he'd left on his encrypted social media channels. Finally, I located him in a derelict warehouse on the outskirts of town, which he had converted into a larger, more elaborate lab. I walked into the warehouse, the smell of dust and burnt electronics filling the air. Marcus was hunched over a new set of equipment, surrounded by monitors showing brainwave patterns. He didn't look up immediately. "Marcus," I called out, using the high-pitched voice I had become accustomed to, but with an edge of desperation. He stiffened, slowly turning around. He took one look at me, at Jessica Palmer, and his jaw dropped. "Ike," he stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It really is you. I mean, I hoped, but I didn't think—" He pulled off his goggles and stared at me. "I thought you were dead. I mean, not dead, but—" "I'm not dead, Marcus. I'm just stuck." I walked toward him, feeling a new wave of frustration at how high and gentle my voice sounded, detracting from the severity of my words. "Why didn't you try to find me?" "I couldn't. I lost track of the resonance signature after the initial jump," he said defensively. "The compound works perfectly, Jake. But I didn't account for the imprinting effect. Your consciousness fully migrated to her body." "Imprinting? What are you talking about?" "The compound didn't just switch you for 8 hours, Jake. It completely merged your identities. Your consciousness is now in her body, and hers? Well, hers is in yours." He gestured to a large, metallic containment pod in the corner of the room. A tube connected to the pod led to a large life support monitor. "I need to tell you what happened when you drank the compound, when your consciousness left your body. It wasn't a clean separation. The resonance signature in your body went haywire. I had to stabilize it immediately. Or, well, you wouldn't be able to return at all." "Marcus, what happened to my body?" "It's in a coma," he said quietly, looking at the floor. "And so is Jessica's consciousness inside it. It's stable. I've been keeping a low profile here, trying to find a solution. I figured you were out there somewhere." The news hit me with more force than the initial transformation. I was responsible for putting another person's consciousness into a comatose body. This wasn't a temporary vacation from identity. This was a complete disruption of her life. "You took away her life, Jake," Marcus said, echoing my own internal monologue. "You didn't just borrow it, you stole it." The guilt I had felt before solidified into a heavy, suffocating weight. I looked at the body I inhabited, Jessica's eyes, her small, soft hands, the expensive clothing she owned. I had been living her life, enjoying her relationships, adapting to her physical form, all while she was trapped and helpless inside my heavy, angular male body. I need to go back right now, I said immediately. We need to make this right. Marcus nodded grimly. I think I have a solution. It's another compound, a reverse resonance stabilizer. It should resync your original frequencies, but it's risky. Jake, it might not work. And the side effects? I don't care about side effects, I insisted. I've caused too much trouble already. I need to make sure she's okay. As I spoke, I became acutely aware of my clothing again. The pencil skirt, the soft blouse, the high heels all felt like a facade. They felt like a lie. The feeling of being feminine, which I had just started to get comfortable with, now felt like a betrayal. I felt a surge of self-loathing for enjoying the soft touch, the intimate moments, the attention I'd received in this new form. We have to reverse it immediately, I repeated. Even if it kills me, I need to get her back. Marcus needed at least a week to calibrate the reverse compound. He said the neurological signatures had fused, and separating them quickly might cause permanent damage to both bodies. So I had to return to Jessica's life, knowing it was temporary. I had to continue the performance. This phase of my life living as Jessica for a second time, fully aware of my theft, was defined by a sense of profound irony and crushing guilt. I started to view everything I did through the lens of Jessica's true self. Every decision I made, I tried to make as she would have. I checked her work schedule, trying to complete a design project she was working on. It was difficult. My knowledge of interior design was superficial at best. I had to access her old projects, try to mimic her color choices, and read up on her favorite styles. It felt like I was piecing together a broken identity. When her friends called, I had to pretend to be excited about events I didn't care about, using Jess's voice until my throat ached. I became adept at code switching between my real personality and hers. The most difficult part was Brandon. After the kiss, he had become more affectionate, more open about his feelings. He took me out one night to a fancy restaurant, over candlelight. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "Jess," he began, reaching for my hands across the table. "I've been thinking about this for a while. You know, we've been together for nearly 6 months, and I feel like we could go further. I want to talk about our future, a serious future." I froze. My mind raced. He was telling me he loved Jessica, and he was talking about marriage, about a family, about a life that was meant for someone else entirely. The internal conflict was agonizing. I was wearing her clothes, her face, her body. I felt a genuine connection to him through the experiences we had shared, but I also knew I was lying to him. "Brandon," I said, pulling my hands away gently. "I can't. Not right now. I need time to think." "About what?" he asked, his smile fading. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," I whispered. "It's me. I just need to figure things out." I felt the immense pressure of living a stolen life. The more time I spent with Brandon, the more guilty I felt for the affection I was receiving. I had to distance myself to protect him from the inevitable betrayal. I also noticed how my physical sensations as Jessica began to change. The femininity I had once found strangely appealing now felt like a heavy burden. I felt like I was wearing a suit of armor that wasn't designed for me. The small hands, the lighter steps, the way my hips swayed all felt like reminders of the lie. The guilt made me reject the comfort I had found in being Jessica. Finally, the day came when Marcus was ready. He called me from the warehouse. "The compound is stable. Jake, I need you to come now. I have a feeling the window for a clean reversal is closing." I stood in Jessica's living room, looking around at her home, a home I had inhabited for several weeks. I had learned to navigate her life, to complete her tasks, to comfort her friends. I had learned to be Jessica Palmer. Before leaving, I walked back to the mirror one last time. I looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was familiar now. The high cheekbones, the long blonde hair. I looked at her and I felt a pang of nostalgia for a life I hadn't truly lived, but had profoundly experienced. Marcus had said I could stay. "If you really want to stay, Jake," he had said, "I think I can stabilize the connection here. You could stay as Jessica Palmer." But the price was too high. I couldn't sacrifice Jessica's life for my own comfort. I couldn't accept a stolen happiness. I chose to sacrifice the experience for the sake of integrity. "I'm ready." I texted back to Marcus. "Let's bring her home." The return journey was less traumatic than the initial transition, but no less disorienting. Marcus administered the reverse compound in the warehouse. The purple liquid once again flowed down my throat, but this time, it felt like a cold snap, a sharp pull from one reality to another. I felt myself spinning away from the lightness and delicacy of Jessica's body, back towards something heavier, more solid, and different. I woke up in my own bed, in my own room. The transition had been instantaneous. The first sensation was the familiar smell of stale coffee and electronic components. The second sensation was the feeling of my own body. It felt incredibly heavy. The weight of my arms, my chest, my legs felt like lead compared to the lightness of Jessica's body. My center of gravity felt lower, more grounded. The bed, once a lumpy annoyance, felt sturdy and solid. I tried to sit up, but the motion felt clumsy and jarring. I looked at my hands, my strong, slightly larger male hands, and felt a wave of disconnect. They seemed too broad, too thick. My skin felt rougher, less sensitive than Jessica's smooth, porcelain skin. How long was I out? I asked, testing my voice. The words that came out were deep, resonant, and unmistakably male. The sound of my own baritone voice felt alien. I had spent so long adjusting to Jessica's high-pitched tones that hearing my natural voice felt like listening to a stranger speak. Marcus looked relieved. About a month. Jake, a full month. Did it work? I asked anxiously. Is Jessica okay? She woke up in her body about an hour ago, Marcus reported, looking at a data feed on a monitor. Her brainwaves are returning to normal. She seems stable. I wiped her memory of the experiment just in case. She shouldn't remember any of this. So, I took a month out of her life, I said, a wave of cold realization washing over me. And she won't even know why. A month you gave back, Jake. Marcus corrected me gently. A month where she was safe in a coma while you faced the consequences. Now it's over. I got up from the bed, feeling unsteady. My body was heavy, angular, and lacked the fluid grace I had become accustomed to. I tried to walk, but I couldn't replicate the subtle, feminine sway I had learned. My steps were heavier, and I felt less connected to the movement of my own body. Marcus helped me change clothes. My old t-shirt felt coarse and restrictive compared to Jessica's soft materials. My jeans felt stiff. I looked in the mirror in the bathroom. My face stared back Jake Morrison, looking tired and unshaven but undeniably male. But something was off. The way I held myself, the subtle stiffness in my shoulders as I tried to replicate the posture I had learned from Jessica's heels. My mind was still operating as if my physical form was different. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to readjust to being male, my psychological journey. However, wasn't over. I had to see Jessica. I needed to know if she was truly okay. I drove to her apartment a few days later, parking across the street and watching from my car. I watched as she emerged, looking exactly as she did before I took over. She was holding hands with Brandon, laughing at something he said. Her laugh, light and high, echoed across the street. I noticed a small detail: her hair was slightly longer than when I had left, suggesting she'd kept up with my habit of growing it out. I also saw that her clothes were slightly different. She was wearing a more practical, less overtly feminine style than before, something closer to the clothes I'd chosen for her during the guilt phase. As I watched them walk away, hand in hand, I felt a familiar pang in my chest. It wasn't exactly jealousy. It was something closer to nostalgia for an experience I knew I'd never have again. I realized I had left a part of myself, a small, subtle imprint, on her life, and I had brought back a part of her into mine. I turned the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I looked down at my hand resting on the steering wheel, and for a second, I imagined it was smaller, softer, and more delicate. Several months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Marcus received some funding for his research, but he decided to pivot away from consciousness swapping, opting instead for less ethically complex areas of study. I returned to my psychology studies, but I wasn't the same person. The physical habits lingered long after the reversal. I still found myself sitting with my knees tightly closed, a habit picked up during my time as Jessica, when I crossed my legs. I did it in a way that felt more natural to a female body, not a powerful stance, but a contained one. My posture, even when standing, retained a slight upward pull from the high heels I had once worn. I also found myself much more aware of my personal appearance. I had let my hair grow out slightly. It was long enough now to brush the nape of my neck. I enjoyed the softer texture against my skin. I still chose clothes carefully, preferring softer fabrics and more fitted styles than my previous baggy wardrobe. I found myself paying attention to small details, like the cut of my jeans or the color coordination of my shirts, something I would have laughed at before the experiment. One afternoon, I caught myself looking in the mirror, and for a brief moment, I felt a jolt of confusion. I expected to see a different face staring back the soft eyes and high cheekbones of Jessica Palmer. The male face staring back at me felt momentarily strange, almost like a mask. I had developed an identity crisis that was completely different from what I had expected from my psychology textbooks. The self wasn't a static entity, it was mutable, constantly changing based on experience. I had experienced firsthand what it was like to be perceived as female. I had experienced the attention, the physical sensations, and the emotional connections that came with it. I learned what it felt like to be vulnerable and protected in a way I hadn't as a male. I began to realize that the guilt of taking Jessica's life had somehow imprinted itself on me as a permanent part of my identity. I had enjoyed the experience, in parts, and now I carried the knowledge of that enjoyment with me. The memory of Brandon's kind touch, the soft feeling of the high-heeled steps, and the security of my long hair became integrated into who I was. I started writing. I couldn't write about the actual experiment for fear of violating medical ethics and destroying Marcus's career. Instead, I wrote about identity, gender, and perception from a new perspective. I wrote about how the body dictates consciousness and how our physical form shapes our sense of self. I finished my final psychology paper with a quote I truly believed: "To understand identity, one must sometimes shed one's own self completely and live as another." As I looked forward to my future, I knew I would never truly be the old Jake Morrison again. A part of me, the part that had learned to be soft, to feel, and to appreciate feminine aesthetics, remained. The experience had been frightening, morally challenging, and transformative. It had cost me my innocence, but given me an understanding of human experience I never would have achieved otherwise. I looked down at my hands again. They were larger, stronger, but they also remembered the feeling of being smaller, of being delicate. The self was not one thing. It was a collection of experiences, memories, and physical sensations. And a part of Jessica, a part of femininity, was now inextricably linked with the new self that had been born through fire.